Thank you. Thank you. So, hello everyone. This is going to be interesting. Apparently, many people like A, dirty, B, front end, and C, tricks. So that's pretty cool. Now, it's not going to be easy because I don't want to do the hard work. So you're going to do the hard work. The way we're going to do it, because they're really dirty, I have to warn you first. The things you're going to see, you will not be able to unsee. And I don't take any credit or responsibility of what happens next once you saw them, right? They are really bad, like seriously bad. So we'll see how it goes. Now, the way it's going to go, just to be a bit more fun, I brought some chocolate with me. So I'm going to post challenges, and we're going to probably cover like 10 or 15 challenges. And if you think that you have a good idea, you just shout, and I'll try my best to throw the little piece of chocolate at you. I don't take any credit or responsibility of whether I hit you or not, right? Again, but this is going to be fun, all right? So, let's go. Now, this is me. This is how it used to look like back in the day. Things do change over time. I currently do live in Vilnius in Lithuania, which is why this chocolate is from Vilnius, Lithuania. But I'm still editing most of the stuff on Smashing, and also I do a lot of consultancy these days, so I spend a lot of time in companies. And companies are real fun sometimes, especially if they're enterprisey, corporate, and this kind of thing, because they tend up to find to kind of come up with really interesting, pragmatic solutions to anything. Right? People can solve everything, seriously, in an interesting, creative way. So let's see. All right, you ready? That doesn't sound very exciting. You have to talk to me. Are you ready? All right, this is better. All right, so we'll start with some simple stuff. That's not too complicated, I think. So here's the task for you. Right, so what if you need to nest one link inside another? For example, inside notes, footnotes, or articles, when you want the entire excerpt to be linked, but you also want the excerpt to potentially contain links which lead to another site, right? So you might encounter things like that. Right? Where you have a product image, maybe, or product description. So you have a block of text, right, which is a link, but at the same time, you might have links inside of that paragraph, which should stay links as well. Now, how would you do it without JavaScript? Can you have nested links in HTML? That's not very clear to me at this point. So if you say yes, you have to tell how you would do it. Anybody? Button and an anchor inside. I'm not sure about that. Okay, somebody said object. Who said object? All right, so here we go. I'm trying my best here, come on, seriously. So there are many solutions, right? So one thing that we could do potentially is, of course, use position absolute to put the link on top of the paragraph and also use that index to kind of make it work. But, we can use object tag because it's fancier. Why? Well, if we actually try to nest a link inside of another link, what browser is going to do is assume that you're stupid and it's going to close the first link for you, but it's not going to reopen it, so in the end, you end up with this part of the paragraph not being a link anymore, right? Which is a problem. Now, we can solve it. Why? Well, how? Well, by just putting the anchor inside of the object tag. Why the hell would you do that? Because object behaves very much like SVG or iframe, if you like. So the browser will actually just ignore whatever is inside. So it won't say, it's so dirty, everything that's inside the object is so dirty, I'm not even going to touch it. So I'm going to keep it as it is, so it's going to work just as expected. Right? Now, I don't say that this is cool and this is something that you should do, but it's useful to know this, because if you encounter a situation when you can't use JavaScript for some reason to kind of close link, open link, close link, open link, then you can actually use it. And in fact, if you want to make it work in older IE, you can use conditional comments inside object, which is probably the worst thing I ever said in my life. But, this does work, and if you feel really comfortable with this, or uncomfortable, you can look at the kittens. If you do feel comfortable, you can read the entire article, which covers the entire thing. Or, again, you can just use position absolute on top of the paragraph. But object is really awesome for two reasons, actually. First of all, because everybody hates it. And second of all, because you can actually embed SVGs in a very smart way. Now, there are many ways of embedding SVG on the page, right? You can do it inline, you can just use image source and background image and so on. But have you tried to embed an SVG file on the page using the object tag? This is awesome. right? Why? Well, first of all, if we actually embed it in a regular way, just by using image source or background, I'm kind of cold, I'm sorry. Then it kind of blocks us access to the SVG path. So if we have an SVG element, SVG file, it contains some path that we want to, change the thickness of or change the color. We can't do it if we embed it this way, right? We can inline it, but then it's not cacheable, which is a problem. We can also base64 it, but it's again the same story. So what can we do? Well, this is the best thing we can do today, actually. So we can embed it as inside of the object tag using just the proper type attribute. And then inside of the object SVG thing, or inside of the SVG file, we can use media queries and JavaScript and CSS and whatever you like. And this CSS can actually style the actual path on whatever we have in the SVG, just on hover or whatever it is we want to do. This works really well. Even in those old browsers, right? That's pretty cool. It's good to know that we can use that. All right, here's another one. Now, by default, we're going to have lots of them, so get ready. By default, broken images look pretty unspectacular, right? So is there actually any way to improve the experience by changing the styling if images are actually broken, right? Because this is what we're getting most of the time. If an image cannot be loaded, then we're going to get this little placeholder thingy with a broken image inside. It doesn't look very, cool. Can we change it? How? Okay, tough crowd. I see. Who said that? Okay. I'm pretty good today. I'm seriously, right? So here's the interesting part that you need to know. Now, the image element, if you look in the spec, you'll find lots of really interesting stuff in there. The image element is a so-called replaced element. It's an element whose appearance and dimensions are defined by an external resource. Makes sense. However, pseudo elements should not work on it unless the image cannot be loaded. So if the image cannot be loaded, the before and after pseudo elements will be applied. And they will not be applied if an image is loaded, right? So we can do all kind of styling to improve the experience of the broken images without doing too much at this point. And it just works. We just apply before and after to image, and voila, you're done. I see a lot of excitement in here. It's great. It's going great, right? So this works really, really well. OK, but maybe this is not too practical. So let's talk about something really practical, something that you probably should be using every single day on every single project. So we like fluid type, right? And we often have to implement fluid typography to make sure that everything scales up and down beautifully as designers intend to do it, right? Now, how do we do it? Well, if you want it to be really fluid, you will probably tighten up the font size together with the VH or VW unit, right? So all the time, whenever the browser increases the window, whenever the browser window increases, you also will have the increase in the font size. It's great, but then it can grow infinitely, and it can become very, very small, which is kind of not what we want. We want to have nice boundaries, right? This is what we would love to achieve, and we want it to be really kind of scale up and down nicely, but not necessarily proportionally, just growing like nuts, or that's getting smaller. We want it to be kind of in control. Now, the problem is following. Now, we could use something like this, right? Where we could just set the font size being the calc of 1 EM plus 1 VW, right? VW is, of course, 1% of the viewport width, right? Now, that works, but then in that case, 1 EM, why do we use it? Well, because we want to have kind of minimum font size, right? That's OK. That helps us, but not quite. Now, we can do something like this when we just included like 4 VW and 4 VH and 2 VMin, for example, and it will all scale up and down. But what if we're talking about the typographic scale? We don't just want something to grow. We want to have a specific kind of, not breakpoints, but specific docking points where the type will grow towards, or converge towards, right? So what if we wanted to choose a font size of 16 pixels at a screen resolution of 400 pixels, and then we wanted to transition to 24 pixels at a resolution of 800? Can we do it without a breakpoint? A lot of excitement here in the room. Okay, all right. No, but seriously, did you have any a problem like this before? When a designer comes to you, wants to have a nice typographic scale, like 1/3 or -3 or whatever, and you have to build it. How would you build it? So it scales down and up beautifully everywhere. No. Could have, but no. Actually, it's a bit more complicated. We just need to use a little formula to make it work. So wait a second, that's okay. That's okay, it's gonna be fun. In reality, it's not that complicated. So of course, what do you have? Again, you have a special boundary, let's say between 400 pixels and 800 pixels, and you have a specific size, like growth, between starting font size and final font size, right? So you just plug it in. Here you've got kind of the maximum of screen size minus minimum screen size, where you're talking about like the spectrum that you're working at. Then here at this point, you're kind of subtracting 100% or 100 VW minus 400 pixels. At this point, you're getting to the area like, where am I? At the lower boundary or at the upper boundary, right? And then you multiply it with the difference between the maximum font size and min font size, and you add the minimum font size, and you're done. That's really not complicated, right? So the only thing you have to do is you have to define all these 4 values, you set them, and you're done, right? And then this is what it looks like. So you have your modular scale, right? And all of these headings, including typography, like the body copy as well, are just going to fluid and kind of grow naturally, without you having to do anything, without even single media query, or without flexbox, without anything, just with one little property. That's pretty cool, right? We actually published an article about this, which you can also read on. So just in case you're wondering, Calc is really damn good, well supported, except you know who, but we're used to it. Right? But this is not quite what you want sometimes. I mean, that's cool if you can just grow and if the font size can grow and actually become smaller. But what about the line height? Because as we know from typography, the smaller the font size is, or the smaller the line length is, the smaller the line height should be as well. And the other way around, the larger the length is, the taller the line height should be as well. Can we fix that? Maybe we want to have something like this. Right? Automatically, without JavaScript, without too many fancy breakpoints, just we want it to be fluid and just right. Again, we have the same problem exactly, right? We have these 2 boundaries. Let's say we have a minimum line height, 1.3. At some point, if it's smaller than that, it's just not going to work well, right? And also, if you're going way above 1.5, it's going to be too wide, right? So we have this nice boundary between 1.3 and 1.5, and we just need to define where it's going to operate. So it's going to operate maybe in a layout between 21 ems and 35 ems. You plug it in the formula. You do a little bit of math, right? You plug it in the formula, and you're done. Right? It's exactly the same story, just for the line height. Where here we've got the full range of paragraph width in here, 35 minus 21. Then at some point in here, we just look at the we need the numerator to see how close we are to the upper boundary. And then we also need to multiply it with the difference in terms of line height to get to this proper factor. And then we also add the minimum line height at this point, and we're done, right? And that's really, really amazing. And in the end, you get this, which without media queries, again, without flexbox, without anything, it just works. Right, and if you actually make the window a little bit smaller, please, whatever, yes, that's okay, we saw it already. Just move on. Oh, get a life, seriously. No? All right, whatever. But it will actually work as expected. All right, here's the next one. So how do you make sure that in a multi-column table, both a row and a column are highlighted on hover and on tab? Now, highlighting the current row is easy. We can just use tr hover. But what about the column? This is what we want, right? We want to be able to kind of tap on 22, and we want both the column and the row to be highlighted without JavaScript. Who was that? OK, not my best one. Yeah, we can just use Pseudo because this is the best thing you can have in CSS. CSS has a few magical properties which just work everywhere and like amazing all the time. A, pseudo elements, and B, flexbox. If you can't do something in CSS, try flexbox. If it doesn't work, try more flexbox. If it still doesn't work, try pseudo elements. This is my strategy for everything. I succeeded so far. So please try that too. Now, how can we do it with pseudo elements without JavaScript? All right, this is really nasty. Maybe you should not be using CSS for this, but you can, right? So we can create huge pseudo element on top of that table that we have with a negative top value of half of that value. Then we hide these pseudo elements with overflow hidden, put on the table, and then we use negative z index so we can actually copy paste the content. And we've got it. And then we can, of course, also use make all cells focusable and focus them on touch start, maybe with a bit of JavaScript, right? But when I saw this for the first time in my life, I literally freaked out and even cried a little bit. Just a little bit. Because you can apply pseudo elements on pseudo classes, and you can apply pseudo classes on pseudo elements, you can apply pseudo elements on pseudo elements, probably, and you can apply pseudo class on pseudo classes. So at this point, what we're creating is, we have this table, we're creating a huge pseudo element that covers the entire table with a width of 100%, because this is the maximum width, right? And with the height, well, we don't know what it's going to be, so we set it on 10,000 pixels. Then we actually just move it all up to minus 5,000 pixels, so it's kind of centered. And then we use, we put it to the left as well, just so it's, just to be sure. And then we use background color, current color, just because we can. And then we can use z index -1, so we kind of push the content to the top, so above the table, so we can copy paste it. And we're done, right? And we can also, of course, apply it to th as well, if we want to. It's actually really simple. Now, you don't need JavaScript for that, right? That's pretty cool. Now, this is not that bad. This is not too dirty. Let's talk dirty. So who has a pleasure of eventually building email layouts? Maybe responsive email layouts? A few people? So these people who are building responsive email layouts, can you please come after the talk in here so we can hug you? Because this is really, really bad. I mean, this is really, really difficult. Now, first of all, it's not because we don't have proper CSS support, not because we don't have proper we don't have JavaScript at all. Images are not loaded usually by default, and we have to deal with things like Outlook and other very similar creatures, which is no fun at all. And you want to make it responsive, good luck, because Google Gmail does not support media queries. Well, because of security reasons, they say, but they will never. They are not intending to support media queries. So how would you then build a responsive email that works well in Gmail? Now, especially if if you're opening an email that looks broken, it's not like you're going to go to desktop to see it in a fancy view. You're just deleting it, right? So, well, let's fix it. In fact, when you're talking about responsive email, it feels like really, really going back in time, when things used to be, IE 6 and 7 and 8, things like that. Because most of the time, still today, although almost every second email is opened on mobile, they still look crappy most of the time. So email designers and developers come up with very interesting techniques, including background coloring, for example, because images are not loaded by default except if it's Gmail, so they will be coloring the background cell, because of course you're using table layouts at this point, just in case. Table layouts, so we can actually color every cell. Now, sometimes you can be really creative with it. I was working with a guy who was in a project where it was really important for them to actually display an image, even if image is not displayed, or cannot be displayed in the mail client. So it was really, really important. Like, it was a button. It couldn't be just a button, obviously. It couldn't be just a cell. It had to be an image that had to be displayed. They came up with a really interesting idea. Again, you will never forget this. But of course, you can transform or convert an image into an HTML table by, for every pixel that you have in an image, you can convert it into 1 × 1 TD with that background color. It's going to be a big, huge HTML, of course. But if you do it right, and you put an anchor around that table, it will work in Outlook. Right? So this is what people come up with. Now, this is really, really bad, and I'm not encouraging you to do it, but just in case you need to do it, some people can come up with really interesting ideas, right? So this is like, but we can do some stuff because we have typal properties that actually behave properly. So we can do, if you have, let's say, like here 4 columns, I think, or 6. No, here 4 and here 2. Right? If we want to move from 4 to 2 columns, with tables, we can do this. We just have to display them as block instead of table cell and set the width properly, right? If we want to kind of move the columns around, we can also do this by just using the table header group and table footer group properties. There are 4 of them: table footer group, table header group, table caption, and table cell, of course, and something else. And the interesting part is, if you look into the spec, and it's probably the best thing you can do, like spec is the best evening lecture you can have, right? It's so fascinating sometimes. Because, you know, with Flexbox, we can reorder components or reorder kind of things in the layout and the DOM. That's great. But we could do that with table properties as well. Because if we have, let's say, three elements, A, B, C, and we want to have, we can't use media queries, for example, for Gmail, but we want to reshuffle them or reorder them to B, A, C, we just have to define B as table footer header group, A as table cell, and C as table footer group, and they're going to reshuffle because the header always lives above the table, the footer always lives below the table, and table cell in between, and table caption between the table cell and table footer group, right? So we can reshuffle up to 4 elements in a very hacky and dirty way if we want to make it work for, you know, all the clients. So that's great. We can use these kind of things everywhere, and sometimes we also need to use, of course, this little thingy. Well, just in case you're wondering, just for Yahoo, because Yahoo otherwise doesn't understand classes. So we need to put it in the attribute selector. So that's kind of nice, in a way. But this is what you will end up with in the end, right? But this is not quite what we want, because we want to make it work in Gmail. So let's say we have a 4-column layout and a large screen, and we want to make it 2 columns in a small screen, on a small screen. Or maybe even simpler, we have 2 columns on a large screen and 1 column on a small screen, right? We just want to stack things in Gmail today. We can make it work, or do you know how to make it work? Now, this is really, really bad. I mean, people who watch me at this point will be totally devastated and go facepalm all the time, I think. But we can make it work with calc, width, min width, and max width. So, can you tell me who is going to win if we set this on our CSS box? So we set the width on 320 pixels, we set the min width on 480 pixels, and max width on 160 pixels. Who thinks that width is going to win? Who thinks that min width is going to win? Who thinks that max width is going to win? Who is literally wondering what the hell I'm doing here? So this is really interesting because the answer is it depends. So if you look into the spec, which is again a very interesting lecture that you can actually read at night, you'll find really a lot of interesting stuff. For example, if the width value is greater than the max width wins. Now that we understand, that makes sense, right? Because max width kind of restricts the growth or restricts the width, right? That makes sense. However, and that's the interesting part, if the min width value is greater than the width or max width, then min width wins. Okay, let's read it again. If the min width value is greater than the width or max width, then min width wins. We can abuse it in so many different ways, right? So let's say we want to make it work in Gmail without media queries. So how can we do it? Like this. That's okay. Just bear with me, this is going to be fine. Now, what the hell are we going here? We want to build a 2-column layout that stacks and grows below 480 pixels. So below 480 pixels, 1 column. Above 480 pixels, 2 columns. We cannot use media queries for this, right? So how do we make it work? Well, we set min width on 50%, max width on 100%, and width as a calc of 480 pixels minus 100%, which is our parent element, times 480. Why the hell would we do that, right? So basically, this is like a 2-column desktop version at this point, and this is like a 1-column mobile version. 480 pixels is our breakpoint, and obviously 100% refers to the parent, to the width of the parent. So what are we doing here? Our goal is to create a value bigger than our max width or smaller than our min width, so instead of width, min width or max width is going to be applied. Right? Does it make sense? So why does it make sense? So here we go. Let's say we have, again, the breakpoint is 480 pixels. So with a parent of 500 pixels, you know, it's more than 480 pixels, right? So what do we have here? Min width is going to be 50%, which is 250 pixels. Max width is then 500 pixels. And the width is minus 9,600 pixels, right? Now at this point, min width is going to win because if the min width value is greater than the width or max width, min width is going to win. Okay? Right? So because it is, let me see, it's 150 pixels, because it's not larger than max width, but it is larger than width, so it has to win. All right. On the other way around, if we go below 480 pixels, so we have, let's say, 400. Here we've got 200 pixels. Here we've got 400 pixels. And here we've got 38,400 400 pixels. And because max width always restricts the width, max width is going to win. Right? And you're done. Right? And you could say, well, this is not fancy enough. Maybe we could do something else. Maybe we can use, JavaScript if JavaScript is not supported. And the answer is, of course you can. Right? How can you do this? Well, what if you wanted to build a real-time wall, like Twitter wall, in an email when you send it out? Can you make it work? Of course you can. And the question is how? External CSS. Now you can do better than that. But that goes in the right direction. You deserve one, I think. Anybody else? Now, obviously, we can reference an image which is going to live on the server, which is going to be updated every 2 seconds. And we then are going to crop it, and we're going to animate it a little bit. Right? So it appears as if it was live, and it's kind of live, just maybe with a 5-second, delay, more or less. Right? And it kind of works, right? That's pretty cool. So that's, not a big deal. And in fact, this is what they did for the email design conference template, and it's actually really, really well done, right? Oh, that's pretty cool. In fact, if you really indeed do have to deal with responsive email, there are 2 resources I highly recommend. One is the responsive email patterns, and the other one responsive email resources. And this technique, by the way, is not from me, but from Remy Parmenter. Thanks, Remy. So that's dirty, but it's, it works. All right, here's the next one. So you want to add a background to inline text for headings, but the text should be padded along both the left and right edge of each line. Now, the left and right padding will only apply to the very first and very last line. So if you apply padding and you have your text surrounding it, so here you've got your padding, right? And here you've got your padding, but here you've got no padding, and here you've got no padding either. Right? So how would we fix it? Sorry? Negative margin, potentially, yes, but then here you've got double padding. Oh, box shadow? Okay, who was that? Damn, why are you sitting so far? Okay, I'll try again later. All right. In fact, we can do this. That's just for you. It doesn't matter. So I hope it's okay. Yeah, so we can do this by just using the box shadow method when we just put the box shadow on both sides and we're done. Right? So we're kind of tricking a little bit, but it's really seriously just adding a box shadow on the both sides, and then you don't have really padding, but it kind of looks like you have padding, right? Well, that's pretty cool, and it's really, really simple. Now let's go go a bit more interesting ways. Maybe, let's see. Okay, I do want to. Okay, not this one. But just a second, sorry. Too many slides, Okay, now, here we go. So here's an interesting one, which is just really useful in many scenarios. So what if you want to use a full width element in a fixed width container, right? For example, when you want some content to extend beyond the boundaries of the container. This is what you want. Sometimes you want to have like a nice landing page, and you have your container where the text lives, and of course you want to restrict it because otherwise the line length is going to be too big. But that image could be kind of breaking out of that layout, right? So how do you do it? VW. All right, well, you can have full screen. That's not a problem. The problem is, however, that you actually do want to make sure that it's kind of outside, but you don't want to close the first div, open, put the image inside, and then reopen the other div again, right? So this is what you, of course, could do. Well, first of all, you want to restrict your container, and then you have your div, and then you have your P, so the images, and so on. And what you will have to do then, potentially, is just close the div, and then open the image, and then open the div again, right? But that's not nice. I mean, in fact, any ideas? That's not difficult, right? Sorry? Negative margin, that's good, I like it. Keep going. Okay, all right, that's okay. All right, so in fact, negative margins work quite well here. to release our child element from its container, I'm very proud of the phrasing, we need to know how much space there is between the container and the viewport edge, right? And we can calculate it just by using calc again, right? How again does it work? Well, we can just use negative v. I mean, here we've got two margins, right? Basically, we are pulling the content out with minus 50%, with minus 50 VW first, and then we put it back with 50% on the parent, right? Of course, in the width. And it just works again everywhere. So we're just pulling it out, and then we're pulling it back with outside of the scope of container, and then kind of back, so it doesn't, so it occupies full screen, right? And the problem, however, is if we do this, we end up with this little bugger. Right? And so because this happens, we actually need to also put overflow hidden on overflow x hidden as well. And then we're really done. Right? So in many scenarios, you would be using, really closing the diff and then reopening it, but you really don't have to. You can just pull it out and it will work. Probably. I think there was something why it wouldn't work. But it might be. I would need to check it out. But it's a good one. Yeah. All right. Okay. Let's see. What else? Now, let's go with something. All right. This is fun. Sorry for being so slow. OK, this is really practical. So you want to implement. How much time do I have, actually? Oh, no time left? OK, then I have to do just one. OK, I mean, but it's really not a big deal, seriously. So just the last one. So have you ever thought, I'm sure you did, I mean, you'll get all the slides anyway. What is the best way to encode a 1 × 1 pixel? Would you use JPEG for that? Would you use a GIF for this? Would you use a PNG? What would you use? Why? Smaller. GIF is smaller. Is it? Let's see. So that's interesting. Some people have nothing to do on the weekends. Welcome 1 × 1 pixel GIF. Just in case you can't see it, here it is, kind of waving at you. I don't think that you realize. And we could think, well, this is not a big deal. This is not that difficult. I mean, this is not really like, it's kind of simple. Uncompressed pixel is just 1 bit, right? Or 4 bytes, depends, again. Depends on how we see it. So if you look at black and white, it's going to be 1 bit, grayscale 1 byte, grayscale and alpha channel 2 bytes, RGB 3 bytes, or RGBA 4 bytes, right? That's OK. And you could think, well, so that's it, right? This is it. Well, not quite. If you want to encode it using GIF or GIF or JPEG or whatever, then in that case you will need to do a bit more work. Because as it appears, every image format specifies not only the actual image, but also how to interpret the data and also has some metadata in it. So for example, the width and the height and the number of bits per byte or bytes per pixel and so on. So if you look specifically into what they contain, you'll find that there is a magic number, which is like a user agent string in browsers, right? It's kind of a fixed identifier which kind of communicates whether it's a GIF or JPEG or PNG or anything else. It also has some decoding details like color profiles, orientation, gamma, dots per pixel. It has some arbitrary metadata potentially, like things like timestamps, copyright notices, or coordinates. And some overhead stuff like markers and checksums or even paddings for consistency, just to make sure that whenever the image is transmitted, it's always actually in the correct shape. And if you look inside, into the hex dump of it, this is what you will find, right? This is a PNG, this is a few markers, even if it's just 1 × 1 pixel. And they differ, and they differ in size as well. And some people really spend time analyzing this. So this is a GIF, right? And this is the BP. And as it turns out, if you look into the table and compare, well, different pixels have different values, right? Which is important to know. But in fact, the smallest one is GIF for white, and everything else too, right? And then you could say, well, this is not interesting enough. What about a color image, like a real color? So if you actually put and go and explore, like not just 1 × 1 pixel, but let's say 10,000 pixels times 10,000 pixels. What's going to be the smallest? And the answer is, well, it depends, of course. But in that case, the smallest is going to be PNG, which is interesting. By the way, the reason why we didn't include JPEG in here is because JPEG cannot be transparent, and it was all about transparent pixels, right? All right. Well, OK, so no more time, right? Are you sure? Oh, 5. Yes, this is brilliant. OK, so let's do this. So what else have I got? OK, this one is really useful too. So baseline ring or vertical written, right? Every designer gets on somebody else's nerves when it comes to basic written, or like the perfect vertical written. How do you do it? How do you make it right? There are so many grid frameworks, of course, you could use, but do you have to use them? Because you can actually make it really simple. Now, in the end, there is one thing you just have to keep in mind. Now, I don't know if you can see it. Well, they're actually supposed to be like a little grid behind. So it depends really on how you implement it. Now, very often, if you think about the vertical written, you think about the lines living between the grid lines. Right? So you have these lines, like you have in the grid, and these lines of text should be sitting right between them, right? And the kind of the same distance between when they start and between when they end. Or you could do it slightly differently, where you just put the text on that line in the grid. It's unlucky that you can't see it, to be honest, but that's OK. I will explain it anyway. So we tend to actually really, most of the time, use just a multiple of line height everywhere. We use it for paddings and margins and sometimes even border width, right? But we can align to the baseline instead, right? So for this to work, we just need to calculate the offset and then shift the content by that offset. So what does it mean? So let's say we have these lines, right? Imagine we have lines. We have lines everywhere, right? Here, right? We have lines in here everywhere. And here is a line, and here is a line. And that line is right where the text sits, all right? Right here. Not in here, just below it, but actually right there, where it's, oh, I'm really bad at this, right? Where it sits, all right? In that case, this is what we can do. So by default, how does it work? By default, browsers center the cap height, as they define it, between the grid lines. So the cap height is the height of a capital letter above the baseline. Again, baseline is where the text sits. So we can shift it by half the difference between line height and cap height. Why? Well, because the text sits right between those lines. So if we just take half of that line, for example, and we remove the half of the line height, then we actually have the text sitting right on the baseline. OK, this didn't go as expected. All right. We just need to determine the cap height and then offset the entire thing a little bit down, and then we have to pull it back with margin, negative margin at the bottom. That's OK. Just a second. So this is how it's going to work. So we have our line height defined. We have our font stack. We could have different typefaces, for example, right? And we have different font sizes. In the end, we are doing pixels here. We're using pixels here. But we can, of course, transform them into EM units later, so it's more flexible. It's just for us to be easier, kind of to follow easier, simpler. So we have the font sizes, and then we just have to kind of refine it with cap heights a little bit, with the formula you will see in a second. So once we define them, we just plug it in the formula, and it works. Right? So how exactly does it work? In the end, we have this little submixin where we define the font size and cap height and offset, and it returns that actual offset. By, again, using that formula which I said before, where we're kind of using the half of the line height minus cap height times font size. Right? It will make sense. I just don't have time to explain everything. Right? And the only thing we have to do is kind of put that offset. Once we define the offset and calculated the offset, we just need to push it a little bit down so it sits right on the baseline. In order to do this, we can use this, and this is really like a magic trick. Most front-end developers will freak out at this point, because you can use margin top and margin bottom. And you could, here you have your offset, so you're pushing all the text a little bit down to sit on the baseline, and then in order not to screw up everything, you have to pull it back with margin bottom when the paragraph ends, right? For example, if you have a set of paragraphs, you want them all to be sitting right? So you have to pull it back so you still have this consistency in terms of how the lines and how they go. So once you have this, you might be wondering, what the hell is going on here? And you are free to leave at this point. There's like 2 minutes left. So why does it work? Because we have collapsing margins in CSS. If you look into the spec in the evening, at night, you'll be able to find some really interesting facts about how it works. As it turns out, collapsing margins are not always collapsing margins. So they work differently with positive and negative margins. If you have two positive margins, the bigger one will win. And like, imagine you have a margin bottom and you have a margin top, right? I mean, if you're doing CSS, you will notice stuff. If you have two positive values on two consequent paragraphs, the one with the bigger value will win. If you have two negative margins, the lower, like the one that is more negative, is going to win. If you have one positive and one negative, they're going to add. So the margins will sum up. We can abuse it in so many different ways, right? Because this is exactly what we can do and what we're doing here anyway, right? We have always a positive one and another one is negative. And this is exactly what we can use. So they will be added up, and they will maintain this vertical rhythm that we want. So what do we have in the end? Only one problem. We have only one problem. If an element doesn't have a border, no padding, and its first child has a margin, that margin will flow out of the parent, right? Because we defined the negative margin, but the actual parent has no padding, so it's going to flow out. So we need to put overflow hidden on it. That's okay. If you could see the lines, you will see that all of this text is sitting right on this on the grid line, without us having to do anything, without any media queries, without anything. Just works using a little bit of calc. Calc is like magic. It's like Flexbox, calc, and pseudo elements. That's all you need to know as CSS person. Seriously. And if you want to learn more about this and just use the mixin, here you go. Right? Implementing baseline rhythm in CSS. Doesn't take much time at all. So with this in mind, I'm very sorry. I have to give away some chocolates just because you. Okay, who is really desperately needs chocolate now? Oh, these people. All right, these people, they want chocolate. All right. Okay, you didn't want chocolate. I'm sorry. So I'm taking up the time. Oh. That was really bad. I'm sorry. All right, so you can just pick it up later. That's easy. All right, so I've got like the slide deck is public. It's already on slide deck, so you can download it. And with that in mind, thank you. And if you want to talk more about dirty stuff and CSS, and not necessarily CSS, just dirty, just come to me and we'll talk. All right, thank you.